In today's Locked On Pelicans, I'll tell you when to expect Zion Williamson back on the court and why the next few months are actually vital to the future in New Orleans. It's a Christmas Day episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with y'all on Christmas Day. Happy holidays, happy Christmas to you and yours here. And we got some good updates. This is a great update to get on this day as we have some pretty positive injury updates that I will share for you in today's show. We'll talk about why it's actually important. All of a sudden, the rest of the regular season does matter even if playoffs aren't out of reach, and I'll explain why in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans, brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code Locked On NBA for $20 off your first purchase. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the number one Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. So let's get into a whole bunch, 5 injury updates here. And let's go with the most recent one. And let's start with Trey Murphy. And the Pelicans sent this PR update out. Trey Murphy III, who sustained a left ankle injury during Sunday's game against the Denver Nuggets, has been diagnosed with a mild left ankle sprain. His status is considered day-to-day going forward. So first and foremost, that's big. That's pretty significant, as this isn't the type of injury that's going to really rule him out for an extended period of time. And after all of the injury issues that the Pelicans have had this season, just getting someone not out for a long time day-to-day with a sprain, he may miss a game or two. That seems fine. Doesn't really matter. We'll see if he ends up playing Thursday against the Houston Rockets. But the fact that this just isn't a long-term injury for something that we're going to get into in the next segment is a really important thing. So glad to see that Trey Murphy shouldn't miss significant time when it comes to this. The other injury update that I think is worth, they're all worth mentioning. This one, let's go to Karlo Makovic next. A lower back disc protrusion has progressed to the return to play conditioning phase of his rehabilitation program. He will be week to week going forward. This matters more for Birmingham in the G League, but given that he signed to the actual team, they could use some big man help at times. They haven't really gone to him. The injuries has definitely played a part in that, but nice to see that he's getting healthy again. You might not even have realized that he was injured. The next guy that we want to look at here is Jose Alvarado with a left hamstring strain. Jose Alvarado has begun the return to play conditioning phase of his rehabilitation program and is expected to return to full practice next week. He will be week to week going forward. This is about the timeline we were kind of expecting. Hamstrings, they say 4 to 6 weeks. They're really more 6 to 8 weeks. This is kind of right in line with that. So it's nice to see that Jose, after dealing with a bunch of injuries the past couple of years and still this year, is now getting back to playing and going to be back in practice, and then is going to be week to week, which means it's probably about 2 weeks out is probably what it's going to end up being for this injury. And that probably means second week of January or so, we should be getting really close to him making a return. Brandon Ingram, left ankle sprain, remains in the early treatment and recovery phase of his rehabilitation program. He will be re-examined in approximately 2 weeks, and his status will be updated as appropriate. So we'll get an update the second week of January on Brandon Ingram, and then probably from there he'll be listed as week to week would be my guess. So he's probably minimum of 4 weeks away from returning. So mid to late January is maybe when we're seeing Brandon Ingram come back, depending. His is a little bit more fluid. And then the big one that I've left you waiting for, Zion Williamson, left hamstring strain, has begun the return to play conditioning phase of his rehabilitation program and is expected to return to full practice next week. He will be week to week going forward. So a couple of things with this injury update. That is the exact same wording as Jose Alvarado. I thought when they both went down with a left hamstring strain that it was going to be real interesting to see if Jose recovered from his quicker and got back on the court sooner than Zion Williamson, lending some credence to maybe Zion takes a while to recover or it was worse than we thought, whatever it might be. The fact that he's listed exactly the same as Jose Alvarado and maybe they make their return at the exact same time is actually oddly encouraging that there were no setbacks, that he's taking the rehabilitation seriously. Jose is going to be doing everything he can to get back out there on the court. And if Zion isn't, he's not going to be on the same timeline as Jose was. So the fact that he is, at least now, that's a really encouraging sign for the way Zion has handled this injury and what he's done to get back out there on the court. Basically, what this is saying is the team should be not fully healthy because you won't have Brandon Ingram here, and more on that in a minute, that the team should be ready to go by mid-January, kind of at the latest would be my guess. That's 3 weeks from right now. You figure Jose and Zion need 2 weeks of conditioning and all of that, and that's kind of where they are, the return to play conditioning phase, so getting them up to game shape here. You know, we've seen Zion at practice. We've seen Jose at practice. They look physically good. Like Zion looks like he did in the summer in the offseason when he was in shape coming into the year. Doesn't mean that he's in game shape. Doesn't mean he can play a full game or anything like that. But there hasn't been that like significant amount of weight gain or something like that, which is always a concern from him when he's on the shelf due to injuries. So overall, these are very encouraging injury updates for New Orleans. And we'll get into it in the next segment. This actually really matters more than you might think. The season is lost. Nothing's going to turn around this season, but it really might matter for the future, and we'll get into that next. But seeing basically everyone that might be a core piece going forward back in mid-January, that's good because the Pelicans need to gather some data on this group. They want to see everyone out there on the court, and frankly, you just need these guys playing. Just getting Zion back on the court and not having this be a season-ending thing or a months and months and months thing is a very good sign. We went through this hamstring 2 years ago on basically New Year's Day, and that was a disaster. Never recovered from that, but now Zion has recovered from the hamstring injury or is improving. Well, I'm not saying that should ease your concerns about him, ease your fears or anything like that about him going forward. But at least this seems to confirm he handled the rehabilitation process as best as possible. We had that incident where kind of Shams Charania made up a timeline that he was holding the Pelicans to, and they didn't stick to that. But they never put out an official timeline because I think Zion is on the timeline from talking to people with the team of what they expected it to be. And so the fact that there aren't setbacks, the fact that he wasn't like blowing things off, not taking it seriously, overall, doesn't fix things, doesn't change the past, doesn't necessarily mean much for the future going forward, but that in and of itself is a good sign. Is it an incredible sign? Is it something like, yeah, we can hang our hand? No, but it's a good sign nonetheless, whatever degree of faith that you want to put into that. And so that's encouraging. And now the Pelicans enter a different phase of their season. They're not making the playoffs, but the next couple months actually matter more than you might realize for New Orleans going forward, and I'll explain what I mean. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time, my go-to ticketing app, is focused on togetherness this holiday season. And that means when you bring people together at live events, the experience is that much better. And it's also the perfect gift if you need a last-minute thing, get someone a belated holiday present here. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for live events even easier. And I love all the features that Game Time has. And Game Time Picks filters out all of the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Going to live events is just kind of fun, right? Whether it is the Pelicans and just experiencing the atmosphere of being there, or concerts or theater, whatever it is you're looking for, Game Time is going to be your go-to ticketing app. You can toggle the all-in pricing up front so there's no surprise fees at checkout. Get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy if you're going to a place you've never been before. There's also the lowest price guarantee. Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference if you find tickets in the same section and row for less. So now is always the best time to buy on Game Time. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is also brought to you by Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? Look, I've used it before to cancel a couple of things that I didn't even realize I was still paying for. And what I loved about it is Rocket Money made it easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together all in one place. I love that. If I got to go through different apps, things like that, I'm not going to use them. But Rocket Money has it all in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. And Rocket Money has over 5 million users and saved them a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. What could you do with that money here? So cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And now for your second listen, it's actually reading. No newsletter on Christmas Day or the day after or New Year's Day, but we're still in your inbox all the time, basically Monday through Friday. The Locked On Pelicans new free daily newsletter. Get it into your inbox. Get more Pelicans coverage. Really great league-wide coverage as well. You can subscribe over at LockedOnDaily.com. Just scroll down till you see the Locked On Pelicans logo. There we go. And you'll be able to get it in your inbox. Really helps support the show. If you want to do something that supports it, we don't ask you to throw money or anything to put comments out. No one needs to pay to do that. Just subscribe. It's completely free. Get it in your inbox. Read it every single day over at LockedOnDaily.com. So let's get into these injury recoveries for New Orleans and why this matters going forward. And it is more important than you might think. And you're going to be like, Jake, but tell us they're not making the playoffs. The team still isn't making the playoffs. That is done. That is sailed like a month or two ago, truthfully. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't matter going forward. And in fact, it really does. So here's why it matters for the future. If you still plan on building around Zion, seeing him come back from this injury and being the best version of himself is going to at least make you think you can do it. And then building around him is what you need to figure out. Well, you're going to be able to do that because all of your core guys that we would expect to be on the roster next season are still going to be here, and you need to figure out if they work. So when Zion Williamson comes back, you probably need to run a starting lineup that doesn't include CJ McCollum. And for this, say for the first month that Zion's back, Ingram is still out too. So you have a starting lineup of DeJounte Murray, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, Zion Williamson, and Yves Missi. You could put CJ in there over Trey and run DeJounte Murray, CJ McCollum, Herb, Zion, and Missi. But CJ doesn't seem like he's going to be a future part of the team, after this contract. That is someone they're going to look to trade, whether it's this season or in the offseason next season. Test out your core group going forward. You don't need to win games. So if you put CJ on the bench for a little bit as you try and learn more about your team, this is like a no pressure time to do it. Even if CJ is going to be starting for you next year, and who knows if he is or not, you need to figure out that group because those are the people that you can see being here in 2 more years. DeJounte Murray, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, Zion Williamson, and Yves Missi. You need to figure that group out. You need to get a good evaluation on that group. What you need to do, go back to last season, what we talked about with the starters, is that a group that can win its minutes? The Pelican starters didn't do that last year. They beat up on opponents' benches with Jose Alvarado, Najee Marshall, and others. That is not how you're going to make noise in the playoffs. I've been on our Locked On NBA game night show like literally every other day right now. You should make that your second listen today. It was actually really fun to do on Christmas Eve where we recap all the games from the night before. And I'll be on there Friday as well. The Memphis Grizzlies have played a bunch, and I've been watching them. They're second in the West. They look like one of the better teams in the West. They just lost to the Los Angeles Clippers the other night, and they have a similar problem to New Orleans from last year. Their starters don't look good together, and it's their bench that's winning their minutes and winning them a lot of these games. Except Santi Aldama, as much as I like that guy, and Jake LaRavia aren't going to win you a playoffs game. They're not going to win you a playoff series. You need your starters to beat up on opponent starters. We've said this repeatedly, and that was an issue for New Orleans last year. If your core going forward is DeJounte Murray, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, Zion Williamson, and Yves Missi, Figure that out now when it doesn't cost you anything. When you're in the midst of a playoff chase and you're like, God, we need to get this group some run, but we don't know if it's going to work. We might lose a game or two because of it. You can't do that. Here you can. It's almost a pressure-free environment for these guys to get it figured out and see if that is a group that is an elite starting unit going forward. And you have an opportunity now because of the injury to Brandon Ingram where you don't need to play him because he's out hurt. And then CJ, you can afford just to figure it all out a little bit later. And if he gets upset, he gets upset, but he's not going to be here long term. Take advantage of this because you don't know if you'll get another opportunity just to play these guys for extended minutes. And look, if you're truly committed to building for the future and figuring that group out, maybe you move on from Willie Green and you go with Borrego to kind of get a clean slate and get different ideas in here for what you want this team to do. Because the way they're playing and have been playing, I don't think is what you envision for that core group going forward. So if you want more off-ball movement or you want things to be different than they are next season, don't do it with Willie Green. Do it with Borrego and you get a clean slate with a different starting lineup. And it lets you test a lot of things out in a way that you just don't normally get the opportunity for. All of a sudden, this Pelican season goes from being a disaster to really, really valuable if you can find a way to get the data you need to see these lineups together and figure out if those guys are great going forward. Maybe you realize Misi and Zion do fit together or don't fit together, and then you can pivot from there. Does DeJounte Murray really, is he the point guard you need on this team, or do you need to maybe eventually move him if he doesn't fit next to Zion Williamson? You know, what about Trey and Herbert together? All of that stuff, figure it out when you normally wouldn't be able to take some of these risks. Because look, you'll probably lose some games as there's growing pains with that group if you're doing things differently. Who cares if you lose right now? You're not making the playoffs, so it's totally fine to be able to do that. Next season, are you going to be able to experiment? No. Take advantage of this opportunity fully, and that's one of the most important things. And so all of a sudden now, there's real stakes for this Pelicans team, not for this season, but for subsequent years. Maybe Zion comes back and doesn't look good. Okay, it's going to inform what you need to do. We're going to trade Ingram this season, more on him in the next segment, and then we're going to move on from Zion Williamson and find a way and go with a total rebuild because that group, those 5 guys that are core going forward, didn't look good together. And at least you know that. And one of the things about this whole era of Pelicans basketball has been we don't really know because no one's played together. We haven't been able to figure things out. We haven't been able to make solid determinations about all of that. But you're finally going to be in position to do that with some of the young guys in the group that you want. This is really valuable. And this is more important than just making the playoffs and getting bounced out in the first round this season. This is about the future of the franchise. What are you doing? What is your vision? What is your plan going forward? You now have an opportunity to figure that out with these guys coming back and no setbacks so far, knock on wood, for all of the injuries and everything. So all of a sudden it goes, yeah, we don't care about this Pelican season to, yeah, we really effing care about this Pelican season because it's going to inform the offseason and really could mean you keep going this way. What if that group looks really good? Then what if they don't? But we'll know. We will know. And the Pelicans absolutely need to take advantage of that for the remaining part of the regular season and hopefully no more injuries come up because you're probably never going to be in this type of position again. And then you can realize, hey, we've seen that group. Who do we draft? If you end up with a 4th pick, 3rd pick, not the 1st or 2nd where it's maybe a little bit easier, but then all of a sudden there's shades of gray and what do you do with the decision? You'll have better idea of who's going to fit, what you need to put on this team and the direction you need to go. And that in and of itself is a very, very valuable thing. So seeing that press release email come out, you get excited about this. We're going to have a lot more to talk about here on the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Coming up next, what about when Brandon Ingram comes back? How do you handle all of that? Let's get into it. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. FanDuel's been running ads on here for like 4 years. If you've been trying or waiting for the best deal to to use here. This is probably it. I don't think I've seen one as high as $250 in bonus bets just yet. So FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up the win. You can get in on future player odds. I was talking about this on Locked On NBA last night. Dyson Daniels at plus 4,000 to win Defensive Player of the Year with the way the steals are that he's getting, which hurts us. That might be worth doing. Betting against the Pelicans, take advantage of it right now. They're currently 6-point underdogs to the Houston Rockets at home. Take advantage of that, because if they start winning games when these guys get healthy, it's less free money for you right there. So if you want to get in on the action, just go to FanDuel.com and join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And now for your second listen, Locked On Saints. What happened on Monday night? Only team shutout in the NFL this season was the New Orleans Saints after Monday's game against Green Bay Packers. Is that going to be the wake-up call this franchise needs? Maybe make a change up the top with Mickey Loomis. Go check out the Locked On Saints podcast. Ross Jackson's talking about all of those questions and more, covering everything black and gold that you want. Locked On Saints, make them your second listen today. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So let's wrap up the show. People are coming back from injuries here. What's it mean for a guy like Brandon Ingram? And truthfully, I don't think it's going to mean much. Honestly, if you're running that starting lineup of DeJounte Murray, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, Zion Williamson, Yves Missi, and they're doing well, and Ingram comes back from injury, you've got to bring him off the bench. It still doesn't appear that he's going to be the long-term piece for New Orleans. They're still going to try and trade him. And look, even if he plays a couple of games before the trade deadline, that's not going to change his value at all. If that group is doing well, you need to stick with them, in my opinion. If Ingram comes back, bring him off the bench, use him in a different role, and you still try and move him. Nothing is going to fundamentally change there. And we'll talk more about Ingram a little bit later in the week here. But I think that's what you've got to do. Right now, it's about figuring out the future of the team. You already know who Brandon Ingram is, what he's going to do for your team. If you still want to stick with him, you can do that. But that then means signing him to a longer-term deal, and we'll see what happens in the offseason with that. I could easily see a kind of one-in-one deal, 1 year with a player option, something I've been saying since before the season started. I didn't think it was a guarantee that he was going to be traded. But nothing's going to change his value at this point. So if you have a starting unit that is working and you want to figure it out, you got to stick with it. It means you bring Ingram off the bench. The offers are going to be what the offers are going to be. Nothing is going to really change that at this point in time. You're hoping a team gets desperate, sees they could just get him for cheap, and they go and make the move. In the offseason, it won't impact things. There's no money in free agency, so even if you keep him beyond the trade deadline, bringing him off the bench, you can use him in a different role next season too. If it upsets him, he was already probably going to leave, and he's going to need the Pelicans' help for any sort of deal that gets done. There isn't money in free agency. If he wants a big-time contractor to go to another team, it's going to need to be a sign-and-trade situation. So that hasn't changed. None of that's changed. So I don't really see a situation where you worry about this kind of whatsoever. If you view him as a long-term piece, you put him back into the starting lineup. If you maybe want to sign him to some sort of deal, or you think you can negotiate that, whether it's team-friendly, whether it's shorter, and you kick the can down the road, which if you sign him to a 1-and-1, it's just you're buying an extra year to try and trade him. You can do that. Then start him. Whatever is going to be in the best interest of the franchise. But if Ingram is not part of our future, or we're not going to be able to afford him, or since he switched to Rich Paul and Clutch, we know we're not going to be able to re-sign him, then you don't do that. And I think that's something that is really important with this team. It's all about the future. And this is going to get into what we talk about tomorrow. We're doing some trade rumor roundup in tomorrow's show. We're going to try and kind of shift through some of the smoke there. But I think everything is kind of still on the table right now for New Orleans. When Zion comes back, this is kind of his time to prove it of build around me, build around Zion, or not. We're going to get some clarity, I think, at the end of the season on the direction that they should go. And maybe we'll be all in on building around Zion. And maybe that's foolish, given that we're kind of all in on it this offseason, and then look at what happened. But it sounds like he did a lot of the right things at times, but still there's some concerns. That video of the tattoo during the offseason, at no point in time should he look like that. Switching agents, I don't think is a great look either. CAA is just as good as they get. it's no different than going to, Billy Duffy and where he is now. So why didn't you take advantage of everything they offered you? So maybe it's dumb, but at least we'll have an understanding of the direction this franchise is going to go in, even if we don't disagree with it. And maybe there's just going to be more uncertainty, and the more uncertainty there is, probably the more changes are going to be overall coming for the franchise. So if you want a change in, the front office, that could lead to that too if this group doesn't look good. But at least and at least we're not going to go through some of this again where it's like, will they be good? Will they be not? The opinions were split this offseason. A lot of people thought they were going to be really good. A lot of people are like, yeah, I don't buy it. We still don't have an answer to that question. And that is a very frustrating and disappointing thing to kind of not have clarity on. But I think we're getting closer to it, of having some clarity around what this team is, who's here long-term, and all of those things. And that to me is a pretty valuable thing. And the Pelicans season all of a sudden goes from, this sucks, we don't care, to, well, yeah, we really care, because it's going to impact the next 5 years, decade of what this franchise is going to look like and what they're going to be doing going forward, whether that's competitive or not, who the core guys are, who's safe to buy a jersey of, right? That matters to y'all, the fans and everything. So we're going to get some clarity. And I think that's at least somewhat exciting to me to be able to know. So enjoy your holiday today. Christmas Day, Hanukkah starts tonight as well. Happy holidays to you and your family and loved ones as well. And I appreciate you making Locked On Pelicans part of your day, part of your routine. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. I'll be back with y'all tomorrow. We're going to talk some trade rumors, what's real, what isn't, where the Pelicans thinking, what are they looking at. Got some good insight to share with y'all that's coming up in tomorrow's episode of Locked On Pelicans. I'll see y'all next time.